Good morning. Thank you for joining us for the 18th Annual Town History Series at the Patent Free Library. My name is Mary Kate Kwasnick, and I am the new Archivist and Special Collections Library in the Sagadahoc History and Genealogy Room at the Patent Free Library. Many of you know reference librarian Jack Martin, who has graciously agreed to let me try my hand at hosting today, and he is also providing tech support. Thank you, Jack, for your incredible work on the series this year. Today's presentation is sponsored by Chewonki. We would love to thank them for their generous support of today's talk. I would also like to thank all of the historical societies of our 5 member towns for selecting our fabulous speakers and helping to get the word out. Thank you also to Peter Goodwin and Robin Haynes, former managers of the History Room and founders of the Town History Series. And finally, thank you to you, our audience. You have spent many years building momentum for this fabulous series, and you're here again today, so thank you so much. This 18th Annual Town History Series is dedicated in memory of Joseph Charles Sy, who passed away in July of 2021. Joe was a History Room volunteer for over 22 years, and during that time, he was instrumental in creating and maintaining the memory database, which indexes obituaries in our newspapers. If you have ever come into the History Room and had the librarian find an obituary for you in just a matter of moments, you have Joe to thank for that. So thank you, Joe. This is a Zoom webinar, so you will notice that you cannot unmute or turn on your camera, but you can use the chat and Q&A feature. Please feel free to type your questions into the Q&A at any time during the talk, and we will facilitate that Q&A at the end of the presentation. If you need to communicate with Jack or myself about any technical issues, you can use the chat feature. If you ask a question today that we are not able to answer or we don't get to it, you are totally welcome to email in your questions to us at history@patent.lib.me.us and we can forward them on. Our speaker today represents Georgetown Historical Society. I am so pleased to welcome Jeanne McGowan. Jeanne has been a volunteer at the Georgetown Historical Society for over 20 years. And she wants you to know that the Georgetown Historical Society is open, so please pay them a visit. If you tuned in last year, you may remember Jeanne's presentation on Captain Stin Davis. We are so thrilled to have Jeanne back for this year's Town History Series. Welcome, Jeanne.
Thank you very much. When you just said that, it reminds me that I seem to be on a captain series here. So I'm going to stop video and then go to screen sharing so we can begin. And here we go. So good morning. It's such a pleasure to be back here in the Town History Series. We at GHS have really missed doing this in person. As you all know, it's great to be able to do give and take in these kinds of events, but we're very grateful that the History Room has given us all of us the Zoom option for what some of us are now calling Cabin Fever 2022. Last summer, Betsy Alley, sister to the late Linda Haggett, brought to GHS an amazing collection of documents, photos, and keepsakes that were once held by her sister Linda and Linda's husband, David Haggett. David was the son of Muriel Spinney Haggett and therefore grandson of Captain Herbert Spinney. It's a large collection that will take us quite a while to assess and catalog, but we thought that sharing some of the collection's contents, particularly a few of the images by way of the Town History Series, would be a nice way for us to start to take a look at what is there. Most of the images you will see were taken by Captain Spinney. Photography was a favorite hobby of his. He developed and printed his own negatives, sometimes with the assistance of his wife, Alberta, and their daughter, Grace. Captain Spinney's collection of birds was derived from a combination of natural deaths and hunting. He was also a self-taught naturalist and a taxidermist. This presentation is but a small glimpse into the life of a man of many talents, focusing on his time on Seguin Island and being lightkeeper there, and his interest in ornithology. But we hope also that you'll enjoy a brief description of the Spinney family and its arrival to Maine, and Captain Spinney's life after Seguin, And we hope you enjoy it and look forward to the questions afterwards. The caption on this image says it is the keeper's house on Seguin, and it was taken by Captain Spinney. That was a bit of a surprise to us because we had always assumed that the keeper's house was the brick house. So maybe some folks who are more familiar with Seguin can enlighten us about this. In 1904, the Boston Globe newspaper did an extensive story about the captain and Seguin Island, and we'll be quoting several times from that article because it seems to put us in the moment and the time. Quote, Seguin Island lies off the Kennebec River, where tides and currents continually quarrel about which way a vessel ought to go. It was next chosen after Portland Head as a place to need a beacon light and a rough tower to carry a small candle light, and it was built there as early as 1795. The island itself, with its tip-top 150 feet above the sea level, serves well to elevate a light, and consequently from its present low tower, as brilliant as modern lighthouse optics can devise, Seguin light can be seen from the deck of a vessel 20 miles at sea. This will give you a brief summary of Captain Spinney. He was born in 1862 in Georgetown to Lorenzo Dow Spinney and Mary Elizabeth Marr Spinney. Family notes suggest to us that he was, as they say, he went to sea on a coastwise vessel as a young man. That in 1883, he married Alberta Munsey, and in 1884, they had a daughter by the name of Grace Mildred Spinney. In 1893, he entered the U.S. Lighthouse Service as the second assistant keeper at Seguin. And in 1898, he was promoted to first assistant keeper. And by 1903, he was the full light keeper as appointed and served that way until 1907. In 1906, his wife Alberta died, and soon thereafter, he left the lighthouse service. Shortly after he left the service, he began work for the state of Maine and the Department of Agriculture and was with what was called the Gypsy Moth Commission. In 1908, while in York County doing that work, he met and married Ina Burrell of Wells, Maine. In 1911, he served as city forester for the city of Bath for 1 year. And in 1914, he began work for the Massachusetts State Hatchery, doing trout culture and raising game birds. In 1915, he moved back to Bath and worked at BIW through at least 1937. In 1919, he became game warden for Saginaw County, and he served in that position until 1927. And then in 1943, he died at his house at 52 High Street in Bath. And I should have mentioned that that was a picture of Captain Spinney in his lighthouse service uniform. First, let's briefly speak of the history of the Spinney family in Maine. The first to arrive was Thomas Spinney, born about 1630, perhaps near London, England. And according to Old Kittery and Her Families by Everett Stackpole, quote, he shipped as a fisherman for the North American coast for Piscataquis by a Captain Fernald, end quote. He was first noted in Kittery in 1651 when he married Marjorie Randall, who already had a daughter, and together they then had 5 children. They built a house at Kittery and lived there the rest of their lives. And you will see there are 3 images. The one to the left is the larger of the images. It gives you more perspective from Old Kittery and Her Families. And then there's a close-up in your upper right. And you'll see the arrows pointing to where the Spinney property was. According to Old Kittery and Her Families, quote, north of Glanfield was a lot owned by Thomas Spinney. His grant of 200 acres lay on both sides of the Great Cove, later called Spinney's Cove. Though the grant was made in 1659, it is probable that he had been living here for some time, end quote. Note that the chart of east side of Great Cove, 1697, the one that I've made into kind of a green color, now shows the additional Spinney lots and references down at the bottom, Tom Spinney's old lot. So you see Tom Spinney's old lot or original lot, and then 2 additional lots that belong to the Spinney family. More than 100 years later, in the 1760s, John Spinney, great-grandson of Thomas and Marjorie, left Kittery, where the family had been living for many years, and with his wife, Joanna Pettigrew Spinney, and their firstborn child, John, settled on Long Island, which many of you know sits in the Kennebec River between the towns now known as Phippsburg and Georgetown. And I've circled Long Island with a red marker so it can stand out and you can see it. And as you look to the left and right of it, you'll see very familiar scenes of Heel Eddy and Fort Popham and Spinney's Oceanfront, which I believe was closed and sold a few years ago. Maybe some of the folks who enjoy that can let us know if it's back operating again. Once they came to this area, they set down roots on Long Island. John and Joanna Pettigrew Spinney married on 25 November 1750 in Kittery. She was the daughter of Thomas and Mary Hutchins Pettigrew and was born in October of 1732. They settled on Long Island in the early 1760s. Except for their son, John, all children are recorded as being born in, quote unquote, Georgetown. Now we put that in quotes because some of the births were in perhaps what is now thought of as known as Phippsburg, since Phippsburg was a part of Georgetown until 1814. And so on your left, you have the actual Georgetown Vital Records, a digital version of it, and the red marks indicate the names of the children. And that includes, I put them on the right side, John Spinney, who was born in Kittery. And then there are other children, Elizabeth, Anne, Jeremiah, Mary, Johanna, Richard, Eunice, and Jane. Those who look closely will note that Jane Spinney's actual birth date is not on the original record, but we have found it elsewhere. And so we know that that's what it was. This is the home of Thomas and Susan Grover Spinney, built roughly 1860 on Long Island. So about 100 years after the arrival of John and Joanna Spinney onto Long Island, living on Long Island, Thomas Spinney, the grandson of John and Joanna, lived in this house on Long Island with his wife, Susan Grover Spinney. Now, according to the 1860 US Census, Thomas and Susan and their children were living on Parker's Head in Phippsburg. But by the 1870 census, they were in Georgetown, presumably here on Long Island. As I mentioned before, in the US Census in 1860, their resident post office was at Parker's Head, and then by 1870, their post office is in Georgetown. And these are images. On the right is Susan Grover Spinney, and on the left, from a photo that we actually found on Ancestry, we believe that to be Thomas Spinney. Herbert Lyndon Spinney was born to Lorenzo and Elizabeth Marr Spinney in 1862. So this daguerreotype was perhaps taken about 1869 if we presume that he's about 7 years old in that image. And according to descendants, he lived in this house at Parker Head when he was a very small boy. And of course, the photograph is taken many years later in 1947. So perhaps some of our friends who know the Parker Head region can let us know if they recognize that house and have any memories about that. This is a page from the 1870 US Census and is perhaps of the residents of Long Island. We say perhaps because there was no definitive line drawn between what was just generally Georgetown and what is Long Island. But on this page, if you scan the names and occupations, you can get a sense that maybe the idea of being a lightkeeper came to mind for Herbert fairly early on. Both his father, Lorenzo, and his grandfather, Thomas, are listed in this census as fishermen. But as you can see, Lemuel Crane, who's living on or near Long Island, was the lightkeeper at that time in 1870 at Seguin. His son Obed is the second assistant lightkeeper. And there's a Joseph Crane, who's the first assistant lightkeeper. You'll also see that our Charles and Nancy Spinney Clark and family, and Nancy is Lorenzo's sister. That means Herbert's aunt. Thomas and Susan Grover Spinney, Herbert's grandparents, are there. And then, of course, Lorenzo and Elizabeth Marr Spinney and their family are there, including a 7-year-old Herbert and a 5-year-old Millard. This is a great picture of the Georgetown Band Boys, although I find it wonderfully amusing that someone, perhaps Herbert himself, has written at the bottom, Georgetown Bad Boys, Monhegan Island, 1888. The photo is a part of the Spinney collection, but the article you see to your left is from an undated Coastal Journal newspaper. In response to that Coastal Journal article, a reader wrote back and said that he had the names of the members of the band from notes on a photograph he had, that his mother had written the names. And according to that source, Herbert Spinney, as you can see if you follow the arrow, is the gentleman with a snare drum. And for those of you who are familiar with Georgetown names, a lot of those names will sound familiar to you as well. Oh, and I should say, what this is about, according to the article, is that there would be cruises on these boats, these ships, and the Georgetown band would be on board to provide entertainment, and they would go from the Bath area to various islands. And so this is obviously one that went to Monhegan. Sounds like a good time. These images are from the Spinney collection as well. It's Captain Spinney's appointment letters for both assistant keeper and full light keeper. And as you can see, the one on the left is when he was appointed first assistant keeper in 1898. And on the right, full light keeper in 1903. According to the Boston Globe article from 1904, quote, Captain Spinney was appointed second assistant keeper at Seguin in July of 1893, a position which allowed him a great deal of time for study and work among his birds. In a few years, he was offered the principal keepership, one of the most sought for positions on the coast, carrying a good salary and certain honors bestowed on only those who have shown themselves good men in the lower ranks. For 6 years, Captain Spinney persistently declined the position, preferring to keep his time for study, and took only the step to the next rank, that is of first assistant, in 1898. Last year, which would be 1903, since this article was written in 1904, last year the keepership once more was offered to him, and he took it, mourning only that the birds must wait aside a while, for Captain Spinney has an energetic way of giving his best to the thing on hand, and he keeps Seguin Island light now he has undertaken to do it with all his might and main. One of the other things we find out from the collection is, and from this article, is that, quote, the work and watches are divided among 3 keepers, Mr. Stetson being the present first assistant, Mr. Hodgson, the second assistant. This is a really great set of images, again, taken of Herbert and Alberta Spinney on Seguin Island. And as the title says, lightkeeping is a family affair. When you live on the island, it is your life's work. I love this picture. This is a picture of the Spinney family on Seguin. From left to right, that is Captain Spinney. And next to him is daughter Grace. And just next to Grace is wife and mother Alberta. We have not yet identified the 2 women in the back row. Perhaps someone can help us with that. But we have, I am glad to say, think that we have identified the fact that the dog's name might be Oscar. So if anyone can confirm that, we'd be glad to know that that's the dog's name as well. Approaching Seguin Island. Again, from the 1904 Globe article, Seguin Island is not in any sense a place of danger, except such as exists everywhere, where one lands on or leaves the beach from a boat slip. On Seguin, there is no available sand strip for safely beaching a boat in one approachable cove on the north side. Boats must come or go from a heavy plank boatway, connected by cable and winch with a boathouse built farther up on the shore and of timbers meant to weather winter seas. And you can see that slightly further view on the left side. You can see the boatway and the boathouse, and then the light and other buildings up on the top. And then a closer view showing the cove and obviously someone making a delivery. This is a lovely image of landing a year's supply for Seguin Island. I just want to mention that most of the titles that we have on here are written on the back of these pictures, which is wonderful that original photos have information on the back either by the person who took the photo or by later family members. And it's something that a lot of us do not do. And we've been very fortunate that the Spinney family did that with a number of these photos. Again, from the Boston Globe, to put it all in context, one unaccustomed to the climb must pause to pant many times on the way up, but the islanders stride up like mountaineers without stopping even to look at the view that opens up as the trail climbs high. But even an islander, having reached the top, must recall with regret too fine for words that he has left his particular pet hammer or something behind him in the boathouse down on the shore. And if you're wondering what the climb looks like, there's the tramway. According to the Globe, the station uses nearly 100 tons of coal all year, all of which has to be shoveled into the cable car at the coal bins in the cove and run to the top of the trestle by donkey engine power and trimmed at the fog signal bunkers. Now, if you go to the Friends of Seguin Island light station and learn more about the history of Seguin, you'll know that the tramway is not used for people after a very serious accident long time ago, but used mostly for getting items to the top. And they're currently working to try to make repairs on that. The big 10-inch whistle, a familiar voice to those who travel their way on coastwise vessels, has a record of having been in continuous operation, says the Boston Globe, as long as 14 days and nights. And I think we can all try to imagine what it would be like to have that whistle going off day and night for 14 days. Necessary, but tough sleeping, I would think. Of course, not everything came from away. Some things came directly from the island in terms of some of the food. These are the Spinneys and others salting and drying fish. And someone who knows a lot more about fish than I do can perhaps suggest to us what kind of fish those are. But that is Captain Spinney on the left, daughter Grace, wife Alberta, the wonderful Oscar, and we're not sure who the two people in the back are with the other dog. They could be family or friends. So let us know if you know. As part of his job, Captain Spinney kept logbooks of events on Seguin, and on the 3rd of September in 1899, he wrote this: "Midnight, winds northwest, very dark, not a star to be seen. The air so impregnated with smoke as to make my throat smart in breathing. At this hour, I came on duty. The birds were flying around the light. On going back into the lantern, I found about 75 birds on the outside. Pine warblers, black and yellow throats, oven birds, 2 hermit thrushes, and 1 yellow-bellied flycatcher. All seemed to alight on the glass as fast as they appeared. Very few seen flying around the light." Captain Spinney was an early member of the Maine Ornithological Society. It was created in 1897, and it was the first statewide league of people interested in birds. By 1899, he was serving as a counselor, then later as vice president, and then by 1903, its president. You can see on the left is a copy of a 1901 journal from the Ornithological Society, and on the right is an excerpt from an 1899 edition, and you see by the green arrow that there is Captain H.L. Spinney, Seguin counselor, which I presume is something like being a member of the board of directors or trustees. And of course, at that time, he would have been on Seguin, not yet as full lightkeeper, but as first assistant keeper in 1899. In A History of Maine Audubon, written by Maine historian Herb Adams, he wrote, quote, "The Ornithological Society's first foray into activism was crowned with success. In 1901, At the urging of the Young National Audubon Society, it successfully lobbied the Maine legislature to pass the American Ornithologist Union's model law, protecting all non-game birds, nests, and eggs. This is a picture by Captain Spinney of marsh hawk nest and eggs. He took that in Martha's Vineyard in 1899. Here he has a picture of what he calls a long-barred owl. In the history for Maine Audubon written by Herb Adams, he writes, again, the success was a major step for conservationists and came none too soon, given that Maine's colonies of gulls, terns, and other seabirds had nearly been wiped out by plume hunters for the millinery trade. Encouraged, Dr. A.L. Lane and the Reverend G.W. Hinckley, both of Fairfield, issued a call in 1902 to create the first statewide Maine Audubon Society. The following excerpt is part of an article written and read by Captain Spinney before the Maine Ornithological Society in Lewiston in December of 1900. And the title of his presentation was Reminiscences of Bird Life on Our Coast and the Rapid Decrease in Many of Our Species. And this is a quotation from his presentation. That the rapid decrease of the different species under consideration are due to man or his agents, directly or indirectly, is at once apparent when we look the situation over. The first and greatest agent in the almost extermination of many of these species has been the gun, with its improvements, with no restrictions as to the number killed or limited time in which to shoot them. And as you can see, that shows Captain Spinney having, presumably he shot a number of those birds. And I think what was happening for him was differentiating between the idea of hunting for food and hunting, the extreme of hunting species to extinction. Also in his 1900 speech to the Society, Herbert Spinney intertwines his calls for conservation in the context of his own upbringing. Quote, I well remember my first experience with one of those old guns. It was an old Queen's Arm owned by my grandfather, which from long service had become what was known as a breech burnt, and when discharged caused a recoil that was something to be remembered. For some reason, it had not been used in a number of years. At that time, I was 9 years of age, and my brother was 7, and to fire a gun was our greatest desire. Hastily securing some ammunition, we took the old gun from its corner in the shed, and taking a nail hammer with which to explode the cap, we hastily retreated to the woods close by. But alas, in our haste, we had forgotten to secure paper or oakum, which was needed to confine the load. A happy thought suggested my pocket handkerchief. There was a sparrow that was hopping around on the ground. I rested the gun across a stump and took aim while my brother stood by with unlifted hammer, waiting for the order to explode the cap. It came, and with a discharge of the gun, the experience was complete. For I went one way while the handkerchief went another, and the way the cotton cloth was spread around would have made a laundress shudder. I am happy to say the sparrow was not harmed. Captain Spinney concluded his remarks to the Society with this. Many of our gull and tern colonies, along with those of the herons, have been sacrificed for sport, without even the excuse for millinery purposes. Thanks to the wise legislation of our state, all birds other than game birds, excepting the order raptors and 1 or 2 accepted species, are protected, and it is hoped that ere many seasons shall have passed, the benefit of this law will be manifested by birds returning to their old breeding grounds. These are some images of some of Captain Spinney's collections. And you will see that in this case, it is mostly birds, although he collected other things. And this is all on Seguin Island. And I thought it appropriate to read from his 1943 obituary to describe what this collection meant to Captain Spinney. He had never tired of his study of the feathered creatures, of which he was so fond. In his collection of mounted birds, he had more than 200 specimens, which has been known as one of the largest collections in the state. He had always been considered an authority on bird life, and for many years kept an accurate record of bird flights and their return to this section of the country. Mr. Spinney donated his famous collection of birds, shells, and woods to the state some years ago. And since that time, hundreds have admired his collections and handiwork. This is a close-up of one of those shells. And it's just an amazing, amazing thing to see. As I mentioned earlier, Captain Spinney was self-taught in taxidermy, and my understanding is that he did most, if not all, of these birds. Here you'll see a bit more of some of his collections, the shells and starfish and corals, which obviously he did not get on Seguin. But also on the right-hand side, you'll see that there is what appears to be a fox and some kind of game bird. And to the left is how they heated the residence at Seguin, I assume. And all of these were displayed at their home on Seguin Island. Regardless of what he collected, birds were always something that was closest to his heart. In addition to his keeper's job, he maintained meticulous records of his observations of birds and other things, and he wrote for publications. In 1903, he wrote for the Auk, a quarterly journal, quote, August 23, I found Wilson's petrel in numbers 4 miles south of Seguin Island. They were feeding on the wash of the bait from a fisherman's hook and were noticed a number of times to plunge beneath the surface of the water for food they were after. Although I have watched many thousands of Leach's petrels while they were feeding, I have yet to see one plunge beneath the surface. Now, this is one of these examples of a picture I just couldn't not put in. It has nothing to do with birds, but it is a photograph by Captain Spinney. And you might say it's another kind of migration, and this being heavy traffic on the Kennebec River. What a great picture. I count 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 ships. And with that many ships, of course, there are sometimes accidents and serious situations. This is a boat that capsized in 1898, and it says, I got this from the Friends of Seguin Island Light website. It says, built in 1842, the two-masted schooner Lavinia Bell rolled over on her side beam in stormy weather. The crew of 5 and Captain Olson were able to get to the yawl boat and were washed ashore on Popham Beach. The schooner washed ashore on the southeastern side of Seguin Island, and the tug Adelia was charged with retrieval, and the boat was brought to Bath. That's really amazing. This is a piece of paper that is also in the Spinney family collection, and it is a note from Herbert Spinney on Maine Ornithological Society paper. And we're not sure if this has to do with business, pleasure, a hobby, but the note reads this way. Seguin Island, May 22nd, 1902. Dear Aunt Abby, you will find enclosed $10.25 in full for the boat. I have not seen it yet, but understand it came down last night. Sincerely yours, Herbert L. Spinney. Very formal with his aunt. We don't know for sure, but we think it makes sense anyway that the Aunt Abby he's talking about is his mother's sister, Abigail Marr, who married John S. Clark. And the Clarks, as you may recall from the earlier census page, the Clarks lived on the southern tip of Long Island in Georgetown, where they ran a hotel for summer visitors. And that's a picture of the hotel in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. Some of you will recognize this building as the same structure that still sits at the south end of Long Island, which years later belonged to the Etniers and most recently, the Wren family. And it is a large white building. So if you've ever stood at Popham or other places where you can see the south end of Long Island, you will know what building this is. While the Spinneys, that is Herbert and his wife and family, were on Seguin Island, back on the main island, or that there is Georgetown. These are pictures of Mary Elizabeth Marr Spinney, who after her husband, Mr. Spinney, died, married an Oliver. She's the mother of Herbert Spinney, lived at this home in the Oval Circle on Bay Point while she was the postmistress there. And below, in those two pictures, left and right, she surveys her flower garden, and on the right with her daughter-in-law, Alberta. Sadly, this is perhaps the last of Herbert's first wife, Alberta. A notation on the picture states she was 40 years old at the time of this picture, suggesting that it was taken about 1903. She would have lived just 3 more years before dying of breast cancer while living on Seguin. And as part of the obituary, it says, at home on Seguin Light Station, Mrs. Alberta, wife of Herbert L. Spinney, keeper of the station, passed peacefully to her heavenly home. Mrs. Spinney had been unusually well during the fall and early winter when a cancer of the breast developed rapidly. It spoke at length about her and her many kindnesses, and saying she was a gentle, kindly Christian woman, a devoted wife and mother, and a good neighbor and friend, and was a member of the First Free Baptist Church in Georgetown. And she leaves a husband, 1 daughter, Miss Grace Spinney, and a mother, Mrs. George W. Muncie. After his wife's death and leaving the lighthouse service, as I mentioned early on, Captain Spinney became a member of the Gypsy Moth Commission in 1908. He was, quote unquote, the first in the state to work on the eradication of the gypsy moth, and Mr. Spinney was one of the first members. He entered it on April 30th, 1908, and was working in York and Cumberland counties. And you can see here, this is an image from the collection, and the big red arrow points to, that is Captain Spinney. While working in York and Cumberland County, specifically in Wells, he met Ina Burrell. And on the back of this picture from the collection is written, Hotel Elmwood in Wells, Maine, Papa Herbert Spinney lived here while in gypsy moth work, met Ina Burrell. In the Bath Daily Times from a 1941 article, which spoke of the 79th birthday of Captain Spinney, they wrote, it was in 1908, while in Wells, that he and the former Ina M. Burrell of Lynn, Massachusetts were married. And recently they celebrated their 33rd wedding anniversary. And that's Ina, obviously, on the left. So as I mentioned earlier, photography was also a passion for Captain Spinney. And there's no writing on this, but I'd be hard pressed to think that there were too many 6-masted wooden sailing vessels on the Kennebec at the time. And so one might think that this is the Wyoming. And for those of you who are not familiar with the Wyoming, it was built in 1909 at the Percy and Small Shipyard in Bath, and was the largest wooden sailing vessel in the United States at the time. And it was the last 6-masted schooner built on the East Coast. She measured 3,730 gross ton. Registered length was 329.5 feet, and her hold could carry 6,000 what they call long tons of coal. And she was built for the coastal coal trade, and unfortunately was lost with her crew of 14 in 1924. So knowing that the ship was built and launched up to and in 1909, we can assume that this photo was not taken while Captain Spinney was on Seguin, but clearly photography was still something that he very much enjoyed doing. Life after Seguin involved mostly, for many, many years, living in Bath, Maine. And these are images of Ina Burrell Spinney, Captain Spinney's second wife, and their 2 daughters, Marion Linden and Muriel Alberta. Grace, who was the only child of Herbert and his first wife, Alberta, is shown in the right-hand side of your screen as a grown woman. And unfortunately, another tragedy hit the family in 1923 when Grace Spinney, then Grace Spinney Wallace, was killed in a car train collision just outside of Brunswick. I'm just going to let this picture sit for a second because the picture and what was written on the back of it, which is the title of the slide itself, Mama and two others holding birds. What more can I say than that? It's a great shot. The quote doesn't give us a sense of who the narrator is, though, so therefore we're not sure who Mama is, but our thoughts are that the woman in the middle is Ina. And to me, just personally, I could very easily be wrong. The woman on the right sort of looks like Grace Spinney Wallace. But regardless, all the women look wonderful. And despite that, though, the real stars of the show have to be the birds, don't you think? Great shot. Here are two pictures of Ina Burrell Spinney and her husband, Herbert L. Spinney, at their home in Bath, with a single picture of Captain Spinney on the right-hand side. These are two images from the collection where someone has noted they are Herb Spinney in 1940 at 52 High Street in Bath, looking towards Winnegans from 52 High Street. So clearly at the age of 78 in 1940, Captain Spinney was still keeping watch. And if Captain Spinney remains on watch, perhaps to this day, perhaps he too saw the rare bird that recently delighted watchers along Georgetown shore, the stellar sea eagle in flight in Georgetown this past December. If he could, I have no doubt that he was keeping an eye on them. And that's our presentation. Thank you.